Within the politics of jujutsu sorcery, there exists a great divide between the mindsets revolving around the nature of curse technique and its usage. This divide is that of the traditionalist versus the modernist. As with each passing era, new sorcerers will find different ways to subtract movements or modify their traditions in order to more modernize their curse technique. Though a modification that is too unique in a sense, or too modern, can result in the sorcerer essentially becoming blacklisted, while traditionalist sorcerers, like those of the big three families, tend to focus on cultivating their specific treasured techniques and keeping them as pure as possible, sometimes even restricting them to stay within their bloodline, which goes on to give them a lot of political clout and allows them to strong-arm their values onto the rest of Jujutsu society. And one of the heads of these big three clans embodies the traditionalist mindset in more ways than just sorcery. This being the aged alcoholic aberration annihilator and anime authority, Naobito Zenin, the 26th head of the Zenin clan. Naobito Zenin was a supporting character and the former acting head of the Zenin clan during the first major half of Jujutsu Kaisen's main story. He is a relic of a bygone era and is as arrogant as he was talented. Being a natural-born strategist, everything he does was carefully planned out to ensure that he and his clan would benefit the most from any situation they'd be put in. And while some of the comments he makes throughout the series suggest that times have been changing, it could be argued that his strength alone was really what kept his clan together in the modern age. But his actions both in life and in death that were driven by the traditions that he was taught are ultimately what led to the complete destruction of the same clan that he sought to cultivate. Though before we get too deeply into that, let's understand the meaning behind his name and design. Starting first with his design, Akatame stated in the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbook that Naobito's own design was directly inspired by the appearance of the legendary surrealist artist known as Salvador Dali, with the inspiration being most noticeable when we look at Dali in the later years of their life. As well, elements of Dali's work in those later years are likely what went on to inspire Naobito's own curse ability. I also believe that this isn't the sole inspiration for his design, as given the fact that Naobito has a major focus on inherited ability, being the inherited leader of a massive organization, and the story focuses on the treatment of his lineage, leads me to believe that Akatame may have also taken inspiration from Heihachi Mishima from the Tekken series. We even see that Naobito utilizes a karate-inspired hand-to-hand combat style whenever he is fighting cursed spirits. Now, name-wise, Naobito Zenin, like all their names in Jujutsu Kaisen, hold within it a specific meaning that ties back to his character in some way. Starting first with his family name, this being Zenin, which of course is not exclusive to Naobito and isn't even the first time that it appears in the story. The name itself ties back to one of the big three families in Jujutsu. Now, when broken down, the Zen in Zenin originates from the same place as the Zen in the Japanese school of Buddhism, known as Zen Buddhism. The Zen itself is just a deep meditative state that involves an awareness of oneself and the dissolving of one's desires. Following this, you have the In Zenin, which simply means temple or school, and when read together, implies that Zenin is a family that has a powerful connection to both spiritualism, but also a deep history in the world. Two elements of the clan which made them a part of the big three. Though Naobito does seem a little strange as the head of this specific clan, but we'll get more into that later. Now, name-wise, Naobito is a rather strange one with a couple of layers to it. Firstly, you have the now portion of the name, which means to straighten or make honest, which could relate to his own cruel training and treatments of those around him that he viewed as lesser. But you also have the Bito portion of his name, which essentially means the second person, or in more direct terms when referring to family, the second son. This could be in reference to Naobito not being his father's firstborn, which is somewhat reinforced when we look at the Zenin family tree, as Toji Zenin is Naobito's nephew and likely is the son of Naobito's older brother, as he cannot be the son of Ogi, his younger brother, which this separation in being the second son could explain why Toji's bloodline is what carried the Ten Shadows technique, while Naobito's lineage only carried projection sorcery. Though if we separate the B from Bito and connect it back to the first character of No, we get Nobi, which could be in reference to the Naobi no Kami, or the Nahabi no Kami, which are Shinto gods born from Izanagi after he washed the filth of the netherworld from him, known as the Magatsuhi. The Naobi were created to fix or straighten out the calamities created created by the Magatsuhi, and this applies to Naobito's role as a Jujutsu sorcerer, as he is tasked with the mission of eradicating or making straight the cursed spirits of the world. And the way he would exercise cursed spirits is through the practice of his innate curse technique, this being projection sorcery, which, while not being the treasured curse technique of the Zenin clan like the Ten Shadows, it is still an extremely powerful one, and requires a tactical mind to utilize it effectively. How projection sorcery works is it breaks down a single second of time into essentially 24 frames. Within these frames, the user can then map out and execute 24 actions all within that single second. This projected or sketched out set of actions are based on the user's point of view and must be something they can realistically do and not break the laws of physics too greatly. That last restriction is likely there just so that the user can't do something like phase through a wall, but instead have to go around it. Now, this technique can be used in rapid succession as well, and allows the user to maintain their newly acquired speed from each use, which not only helps in building up momentums for an attack, but also allows them to greatly outpace the senses of even a special grade cursed spirit. And maintaining this can become increasingly more difficult as the user gains speed, because their decision making needs to increase in speed as well. As projection sorcery has its own handful of downsides, which makes the usage of it rather risky. Firstly, the failure to uphold the restriction of the 24 actions a second rule can result in the user freezing in place for 1 second. This can completely disrupt the flow of battle, especially one where speed is key. It's kind of like losing your flow in the middle of a match. As well, once the pattern has been created by the user, they must follow it without deviation, or else suffer the same 1 second penalty. Because of these drawbacks, a projection sorcerer needs to have an innate talent for timing, placement, and frame management, as they not only need to predict their own movement pattern, but the movements of the target they are fighting within a 1 second window. Which is why this being Naobito's natural talent allows him to be so extremely dangerous with this technique, so much so that he has earned the title of the fastest sorcerer in the world. Excluding Satoru Gojo, of course. Now, these downsides aren't exclusive to just the user, as the technique's drawback can be weaponized, with projection sorcerers being able to force the 24 actions in a second rule onto anyone they touch with their palm when their ability is activated, meaning that an opponent who can't think as fast or plan out their movements as well as Naobito end up working at an inherent disadvantage. This is especially true for those who don't even understand what he is doing when he activates his ability, and one's failure to comply to these new rules that have been set in place by the sorcerer have a different form of punishment than when the sorcerer himself fails, as not only are they frozen in place for 1 second, but they end up being trapped in an animation cell-like structure. These cells leave those encased completely helpless and allows the user, or their allies, to strike the encased target with an attack that bypasses their natural defenses. Now, the history of projection sorcery is actually rather interesting, as according to the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbook, the curse technique wasn't actually always based on animation and animation cells, only becoming more focused on that during Naobito's own era. Instead, projection sorcery used to be based on the history of film and video, likely pulling its curse roots from the occult adoption of the camera obscura, or early projectors, which were utilized to do many different things across many different cultures, from being a study or scientific aid to, of course, its usage in stage plays, as it allowed one to project an actor onto the stage from underneath it, giving them a very ghostly appearance, which of course required a lot of careful planning by the director, but allowed for an experience unlike any other. And this complex forward planning approach is likely what led to Naobito's technique developing the way it did. This same projector would also lead to the advancements of a lot of film and cinema, which could explain why film reels would later be used in the technique when it is turned into a domain later on in the series. As well, the decision to focus on 24 frames in 1 second as a standard for the technique originates from the film standard of 24 frames per second, which was set into place in the 1930s. As in the case for 35mm film, it was found to be the minimum required amount of frames to make the film motion look smooth. Now, this change in the curse technique could have occurred for for likely two specific reasons. One is an in-universe reason, and the other is based more off of a meta reason. Firstly, there is the historical context for the shift from film to animation, as judging by Naobito's age of 71 in Jujutsu Kaisen taking place in 2018, and the fact that we know that this change occurred during his lifetime, the shift in the technique's inspiration actually lines up pretty well with a huge cultural shift in Japan at that time, specifically in the entertainment industry around the late 40s to 50s. As while animation did exist in Japan prior to World War II, it wasn't till after the war ended was Western media allowed to flourish again within the country, which eventually led to a great expansion of popularity and influence across Japan, leading to more cost-effective animation methods taking root, and the standards and animation techniques of Disney coming over fully as well. This change in the industry seemed to have even inspired pillars of the modern Japanese entertainment industry that we know today, like Azuma Tezuka, as it was around this time that they began their own creative careers. Japan also viewed animation as much as part of the film industry as any other piece of medium, and thus Naobito and his brothers would all witness a meteoric rise in a brand new industry of film that they could then become obsessed with. Naobito's own expertise on the practice of his technique also mirrors his now consumer-based expertise of the industry that it draws its traits from, as his values of animation mix together very well with his traditional mindset, and it is likely this idea that inspired his own famous rant at Dagon during their fight, where he brings up the problems with AI interpolation, film and animation's unnecessary movement to 60 FPS and 4K resolution, and of course the motion smoothing effect that is found on most modern television, which, outside of live sports events, does nothing but damage the image and integrity of the film being played on said television. This feature is so widely reviled by the film industry that during the production of Top Gun Maverick, Tom Cruise even went out of his way to record a special PSA specifically raising awareness of this feature and asking people to disable it on their televisions, as it is oftentimes active by default. The other clear influence for this animation-based power set seems to come from the fact that Jujutsu Kaisen's anime had just been announced. It was around November 25th of 2019, which was during the beginning of the Shibuya arc, and of course right around the time that Naobito would be showing off his curse technique for the first time. And we also know that Akatame did include elements in the Shibuya arc in excitement for what they would look like when the anime would adapt it, such as giving Jogo a fight against Sukuna after learning that his favorite voice actor would be playing the hot-headed volcano. So projection sorcery could have been a direct inspiration by Akatame's current focus on anime and animation at that time in general. Now, while projection sorcery is Naobito's innate curse technique, being the head of the Zenin clan has also gifted him with the knowledge of the clan's own other hidden techniques, one of which is demonstrated during his fight with Dogen, this being the anti-domain technique Falling Blossom Emotion, which is similar to the simple domain in the fact that it is designed to counteract the automatic hit factor of domains, but instead of covering oneself in their own domain to make the automatic hit effect a normal attack, Falling Blossom Emotion is a true counter. Much like a Fire Emblem character in Smash, it shrouds the user in a volatile blanket of curse energy, which in turn automatically reacts to anything that attempts to touch the user, like in this instance, a domain attack. The way it counters is it instantly releases an equal amount of curse energy in hopes of neutralizing the oncoming attack. Now this defensive technique has its own upsides, as not only does it seem to take less curse energy to use, but it also doesn't require the user to use their domain and then suffer the activation cooldown effect. But it does lack the elegance and total defensive properties of a simple domain, so there are trade-offs. It's also not very effective against more complex power sets. Now, the stance and hand placement for this technique seems to be important, though it doesn't derive from any specific mudra or hand sign like other curse techniques. Instead, it seems to be based off of a martial arts stance, with Naobito's stance here being based on the Kokusu Daishi stance in karate, which is a defensive position that allows a person to easily shift their weight depending on the type of attack coming their way, though we do see later on in the series that the technique stance can change depending on the type of combatant using it, as Naobito's younger brother, Ogi, uses this technique, but he does so while wielding a sword, which means that his positioning was based more off of an Aijitsu stance instead of a karate one. Now, the ability's function and its first utilization seem to be inspired directly from one of Akatame's biggest influences, that being Togashi in Hunter x Hunter. More specifically, the usage of Godspeed by Killua during the fight with the Ortho siblings, as in this fight, the siblings could mark a target with a dartboard and then throw darts at them from a safe distance. These darts were essentially unblockable, as they appeared seconds before making contact with the target while retaining all the momentum and force they needed to pierce them. This same principle is applied to the fish Shikigami spawned during their fight in the domain, though Killua was able to counteract this Nen technique by focusing his aura around his head, and at the moment that the fish spawned into existence and the aura was felt by his body, it instinctively moved using Godspeed to catch the dart the exact moment it would make contact with his head, which of course is seen in the automatic nature of Falling Blossom Emotion's own defensive technique. Though the name of the technique is also rather interesting, as its origins derive from an old Eastern idiom which talks about unrequited love and affection, this being the falling blossoms meets the flowing water, which is an expression that references the idea of blossoms or petals from trees during the spring gently falling to the ground like a kind-hearted individual looking for love. These petals can then get swept away when they come in contact with the cold, powerful flowing stream of a river. The river moves regardless of the flower's intention, and this can be read in one of two ways. The stream could be sweeping these flowers off their feet and carrying them off into a new life, or the river's flowing water rejects the flower's intention and essentially neutralizes it. This second interpretation seems to be why the curse technique was given the name that it is. Naobito's merits and actions during Shibuya greatly demonstrate his strength as a sorcerer, but unfortunately, he is also well aware of his own talents, and this leads him to developing quite the ego, which mixed together with his traditionalist mindset results in him not caring much for the lives of non-sorcerers, with Akatame even confirming this to be the reason why he wasn't helping evacuate civilians during the Shibuya incident itself. Instead, he constantly lives in a state of desire, getting drunk, and wanting to fight something strong, because he's always looking to put his abilities to the test. And unfortunately, this showboating lifestyle of his is what caused him to burn up spectacularly when he found himself in over his head. And while Naobito may have perished during the events of Shibuya, he ends up being as influential as he was talented, with a good number of the events that take place following the event being traced back to him and his adherence to tradition. Firstly, you have his treatment of Maki Zenin, a female clan member born with a heavenly restriction that made it so that she could not see cursed spirits, let alone use curse energy. To Naobito, someone who only valued a person based on their curse technique, she was the lowest of the low and made a habit of tormenting her while she worked within the clan. And even when she decided to leave the Zenin clan, Naobito made it a habit to intentionally make her life harder, as he prevented her advancement in the ranks of Jujutsu sorcery even if she demonstrated the talent to do so, though his prodding only ignited Maki's motivations further to become the next head of the Zenin clan. Though it's unclear if these proddings were intentional to make Maki's life actually harder, or as motivations to encourage her to actually fulfill out her threat of becoming the next head of the Zenin clan. Either way, this connection to Maki would become extremely relevant following his death, as during the reading of his will, Naobito would end up naming Megumi Fushiguro, the son of the famous Zenin clan reject Toji Fushiguro, as the next head of the household. This decision was made for seemingly three reasons. Firstly, the will stated that this would only happen if Satoru Gojo was incapacitated in some way, which was likely a decision Naobito came to because it allowed for his clan to take dominance amongst the big three clans, as having a Ten Shadows technique user as the head of the Zenin clan would fill a power vacuum, as its potential has been compared to that of the Gojo clan's Limitless. He also mentioned a similar idea during the Shibuya incident itself, saying that he wouldn't mind seeing Gojo remain sealed away if it meant that his clan would fall into disarray. He also seemed to have assigned Megumi as the head of the clan in accordance to the purchase agreement between him and Toji, when the sale was made back when he was only a child. But even without this agreement or the power vacuum situation, it is also likely that this decision would have occurred naturally due to just the traditions of the Zenin clan, as the Ten Shadows technique is the technique of the clan, which means by the nature of keeping the clan itself pure, the sorcerer with the clan's ability should be made the leader of the clan. He even laid out restrictions for his own son, the other next in line to become head of the clan, so he wouldn't be able to inherit his position right away unless he has proved himself worthy to the other most trusted members of the clan. Either way, this factor of electing Megumi as his successor, mixed together with his own son's arrogance and Maki's later return to the Zenin household to prepare for the culling game, eventually led to an explosive outburst with Maki where she would eventually end up massacring the entire clan, which had the exact opposite effect that Naobito had hoped for, as the Zenin clan became the weakest of the big three overnight, with the other two clans actually calling a vote if they should remove it or not from the listing. And this all occurred by the hands of a reject, showing the damaging effect of the traditionalist mindset in action. And the traditionalist mindset is a perspective that Jujutsu Kaisen paints oftentimes as in the wrong, especially those who speak on it as if it was an authority, and Naobito works very well as a figurehead for the message of Jujutsu Kaisen according to Akatame, as it is a story where no side is truly right or wrong, but it's through one's own personal motivations which helps define a way to live, which means those who grandstand from the point of view that their beliefs are the truth oftentimes crumble against those who are more personally motivated. Naobito's character was the strongest when he spoke on the nature of something that he was truly passionate about, and he even put in the effort to be respected amongst his peers. Akatame even claims that he gained his position because he was strong, not just because he inherited it. Though when his actions stemmed only from fulfilling a tradition, did they end up ringing hollow. Because of this, Naobito Zenin ends up being an extremely fascinating character. Akatame used him to great effect to highlight the two-sided nature of the Jujutsu world, as while he was considerably strong and showed signs of being a better person than some of his peers, acting as a bridge between the traditionalist and modernist ideas, Naobito also demonstrated the hypocritical nature of the bureaucracy that ran the world that he lived in, as when viewed above the surface, he was someone who was born without the special talent that the clan greatly valued, and gained his position through hard work and the usage of a non-traditional version of a technique which had changed and evolved with time, but doesn't see the value in others without it, even using his clout and influence to restrict the growth of his own family because they don't abide by the arbitrary traditions he himself would have failed to upkeep, as his brother claims that the only reason that he was assigned the head of the Zenin clan was because Ogi's children weren't born special, and it's this embracing of the traditions that would have shackled him did Naobito create the conclusion for his clan, where all of them would be wiped out by the next generation, because they all refused to adapt. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MediNotTheBadGuy. Every little bit helps keep this channel flowing as smoothly as it does, and if you want to avoid being a victim of projection sorcery, I hear a good way to train against it is by buying a copy of Shimoneta, A Boring World with Contradictory Jokes Doesn't Exist at buyshimoneta.com.